This is Arab oil, and there's no longer any gold or silver in our coins. I'm Betsy Bruce, and this is Newsmakers, and we're going to talk about the dollar's troubles, particularly about how it might affect you and me. For instance, what do the constant fluctuations in the prime interest rate really mean to us? And what about the effects of the falling value of the dollar at home and abroad? My Newsmakers in this spontaneous, unedited half-hour news interview program have some different ideas about the dollar. Merrill M.E. Jenkins, Sr., calls money the greatest hoax, and he's written a book with that title. He insists the Federal Reserve notes we use as cash are not dollars, are not money at all, and are not notes or currency. In fact, he uses the word counterfeit in talking about our money. And also with us is Dennis Karnofsky, Chief Economist for the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis, which issues some of that paper money Mr. Jenkins criticizes. And sitting in with me today as co-host is Kathy McDonald from our newsroom staff, who has recently aired a series of reports on inflation. Thanks for joining us, Kathy. We'll be back to learn about inflation and what it's doing to us after this. Well, since it's the end of the week, I imagine you probably got paid recently. Do you think it's real? You gentlemen disagree, I know. I have $5, it says here, a Federal Reserve note. Now, Mr. Jenkins, you say that's counterfeit. Why?
Yes, it is, Betsy, because that piece of paper looks very much like the silver certificates we had earlier and the gold certificates that we had before that. But you had to realize that the silver certificate was a literally deposit receipt or claim check for the silver coin, which was what we really called the money. Now, the piece of paper was not the money any more than a hat check would be the hat that is in storage. So the piece of paper was considered by folks to be the money because it was as good as having the silver, because it would claim the silver from deposit. You could use it to redeem the silver coin.
But this won't redeem anything at all, is that what you're saying?
That is correct. This does not transfer the ownership of anything that is on deposit that can be claimed with it. Therefore, it's looking exactly like the old certificates that did, and having the same numerals on it and the same pictures as before. I consider it to be bona fide counterfeit.
What's the government view?
Well, there's one thing that $5 bill you have in front of you will do. It will buy goods and services for you. In other words, whether it's in fact counterfeit in the sense, does it have something in terms of a commodity behind it, gold, silver, whatever. The public in general treats it as a medium of exchange. They will accept it. You accepted it from someone, and if you try to go out and spend it, someone else will also accept it. It is not an inventory receipt or a warehouse receipt, and that's clear. There is nothing behind that money beyond effectively the productive capacity of this country and the public's faith that the government is not going to abuse its power to print too many of them. Now, there's where the problem comes in.
So it really is counterfeit maybe in the old sense of the word.
Money used to be a warehouse receipt. I mean, it did say that there is on deposit a certain amount of gold. What it is now, it's more like an invoice or a bill of lading. It's a piece of paper that allows you to conduct trade efficiently, as opposed to having to go out. It avoids the problem that economists call double incidence. If I want to buy an automobile, I don't have to find an auto dealer who will sell me an automobile for $10,000 worth of economist services. I can give him that piece of paper, and he accepts that piece of paper on the expectation that he can then trade it with someone else. The problem comes in when people start wondering whether or not they actually can trade that for something else. And the problem we have with inflation, we get involved in that very clearly. And I think Mr. Jenkins and I would agree that the problem is now, in principle, there is no discipline on the printing of that stuff. The government can, in fact, print exactly as much of it as they want. If we had something like a gold standard, there is an explicit discipline. You can only have as much of these pieces of paper as you have gold to back it. That is a discipline explicitly on the government printing money.
Do you agree, Mr. Jenkins?
Well, the analogies concerning the quantity of money can be applied both to the law of supply and demand, which was furnished by Adam Smith in 1776 and gave us the basis for economics. It was substantiated in 1911 by Irving Fisher, who proved mathematically that if you doubled the money volume, you would have double the prices. And he gave us the basis for econometrics, which is used extensively today. In 1950, Milton Friedman of the Chicago School said that, well, if we kept the increase in this counterfeit at a normal, steady rate, that the effect of it, called inflation, would not be horrendous or hard to manage with. But you see, all three of these gentlemen were wrong, and I'm making that statement with my eyes wide open. The actual condition was specified by George Washington and by John Adams, who spoke of the nature of money, not the quantity. Now, if you were limited into exchanging only the goods produced and the services performed, you could not exceed that amount. 100% would be 100%. Now, when you change the nature of what you're exchanging and allow a fiat to be used, then the amount of purchasing power can exceed tremendously the amount of goods and services available. And this extra amount of purchasing power bid by the people can cause prices to go out of reason, and this leads you to believe that it's the quantity of money that causes the problem rather than the nature of money, which allows an excessive quantity to exist. This is the problem.
Well, do you think we ought to have a set limit on how much money will exist in this country for the next 50 years?
Oh, no, ma'am. I insist that what we have to do is gradually abolish the legal tender acts, which caused this problem to come into being. Actually, we did abolish the legal tender acts in 1781 when the first continental dollar collapsed because it was issued in excess of the amount of material available to be redeemed by it.
Well, Dennis, you've told me that if the Federal Reserve Bank quit printing money and there was not that excess of money in circulation, that it would, in effect, in the next few years, cut down on inflation, that we would be able to have more buying power because there would be fewer dollars in circulation. That doesn't sound like what Mr. Jenkins is saying would solve the problem.
I think I would part ways with him on the idea that there is a fixed relationship between money and the amount of goods in the economy. It sounds very good, but that's a very slippery type of concept to get a hold of. For example, you have $1 and say $1 is worth 40 pesos, to make up a number. You know, what is the unit? You know, what is a dollar? I mean, it's just something artificial that we throw out there. And the workings of the market, supply and demand, will tell us how many goods you can buy with that dollar. Now, the problem is that if you print money, you're not creating purchasing power in excess of the goods available. You're not creating effective purchasing power. What you're doing is you're fooling people into thinking they have purchasing power when in fact they do not. You've printed money and you have not increased what they can buy at the same time with that money. They think they're wealthier when in fact they're not. The inflation results when they take this money, which they can't distinguish between money printed in excess of goods and the money printed along with the goods. The money is the money. It's not earmarked in any way. They go out into the market and try to buy something with it and find out there's, in fact, too many dollars out there, all competing for the same amount of goods. Something has to give. And what has to give is the value, the purchasing power of that money has to go down. So I would disagree that it is, in fact, the quantity of money that's printed and not necessarily the definition or the content of the money. We could have anything in principle can be money, in principle. We've all heard, and anyone who's had a basic economics course, of the great rock in Yap, on Yap Island, that they apparently, you exchange goods and services for portions of this rock, the original piece of the rock, I guess. And the rock was either lost in the ocean in a tidal wave or something. That rock served as their money. It was their unit of account. They kept track of things. The rock was gone, apparently. They still continued to use it. They just kept track in their head, in a book, effectively what the Federal Reserve now does with computers. You know, we just enter computer entries. But the rock did serve as money. Now, no one had the power to print a bigger rock either. Okay, there was an effective constraint again. And I would argue that the problem with money that is not commodity money, gold, silver, whatever have you, is the government is free to print more of it without our knowledge. In other words, if the government, right now, handed everyone in this room $10, is that $10 that the Federal Reserve just printed last night, or is that $10 which I have saved out of my income and have passed on to you? And it's a transfer of purchasing power, or have I just tried to slip new purchasing power into the economy? Now, everyone here will accept those $10, right? You'll take a chance that they're still good. That's the problem. You don't know, and that's where the government's monopoly to print money, why it's so valuable to them. The public just doesn't know when they get $1 if that dollar's any good or not. And I think it is the quantity.
Mr. Jenkins, what do you think is going to happen, looking at the system the way you do?
I'd rather correct the misconceptions that have just been expressed by Mr. Karnofsky. He pulled a switch on us here and spoke of the paper as being the money again, when I very clearly explained that before, that the paper is simply a token representing the unit of account by proxy in the marketplace during exchanges. We used to use gold that the paper represented, and we used to use silver. Now, the paper is not the money. It did not suddenly become dollars. Dollar was a word which expressed a quantity of gold and silver in coin form, which made up a dollar quantity of gold or silver, when that gold or silver coin was the money of account of the United States. Now, if we want to talk about what this represents today, the Federal Reserve note, we have to say that it represents debt. They say that it is debt monetized. Now, if you're going to accept that debt is debt in one case and debt is money in another, you have a tremendous problem to offset. If we define debt as the undelivered portion of an exchange, and then we think of money as an asset which is the delivered portion of the exchange, we have to now accept that debt can be both the delivered and the undelivered portion. I can explain that much easier if you'll allow me to make a little demonstration. I have here a dollar quantity of silver in coin form, which was our former, quote, silver dollar. Now think of it. It was a dollar of quantity of silver in coin form, and we called it silver dollar. This led to our downfall. You wouldn't refer to a quart of milk as a milk quart or a pound of bread as a bread pound. But what we did was give the quantity the acceptance of being an entity. Now we have today the copper nickel Eisenhower coin. Now this has 3% of its face value in actual commodity. This has 100% of its face value in actual commodity. Now the theory is this, that if you give up $1 worth of your labor and you accept this 3% of wealth in return, if you realize that you did not get 97% of what you had coming, you then know that you've established a debt. If you think that this is no different than having the silver one, and you accept the 97% of commodity value that you did not get as being money, then in your mind you have monetized debt. You have turned the debt into money. Now that's very interesting, because on the note it says this note is legal tender for all debts, public and private. Mr. Karnofsky mentioned earlier that it has purchasing power. It does not have purchasing power. It only has the power by edict of government to settle debt. You're forced to take it in settlement of debt. But until I offer you something, we haven't established a debt to be settled. When the people refuse to use the paper and go back to bartering, they will be forced to go back to a medium of exchange which is tangible and not an intangible debt.
Okay, we're going to take a break right here and pause for a moment. We'll be back after this. We're talking about money and inflation today. Gentlemen, tell us your thoughts on how we can deal with inflation on an individual level?
Well, the first thing to do is not hold on to this stuff, whether we're going to call it money or not. Inflation is quite simply the devaluation of this thing which we are using to conduct transactions. I'm trying to avoid the term money. Whatever it is, okay, if it's paper or if it's copper nickel alloy, sandwich coin, whatever, it is the thing which will bear 100% of the burden of inflation. And you don't, when you hold a dollar and prices go up 5%, you lose the entire 5%. Other assets you might lose 1%, 2%. You can cover yourself. The thing that people have to do is don't put themselves in a position, one, where they are holding this stuff over time, and also don't put yourself into a position where you have agreed to the promise that someone is going to settle a debt with you in a fixed number of those things at some time in the future. For example, what I'm saying is don't lend money that's going to be repaid in money, because at the time of repayment, by money again, I mean these pieces of paper, when you're going to be repaid in these pieces of paper, the purchasing power, the amount that you can buy of goods and services with that in exchange with someone else, is uncertain. It's probably going to be less. How much less, you don't know. What you have to do in principle is buy and hold all of those things whose price, in terms of that paper, is going to go up. Now, there are all sorts of things. People buy houses because they're increasing in value. Some people buy gold because the gold presumably will maintain its value relative to automobiles, bread, beer, whatever have you. The thing which is clear is this stuff is not going to maintain its, quote, value, and we can disagree if whether it has any value at all, but it's going to be worth less to you over time if the government is going to continue to print more and more of it.
Okay, Mr. Jenkins.
Well, I'm very happy to see Mr. Karnofsky put the last time he used the word value in quotes, because actually what we're discussing here is parity. Now, a lot of people use the word and very rarely understand its true meaning. Parity is the value of any one thing expressed in terms of another. If we were to look at whether or not goods have been going up in price or money has been depreciating, we would find that if we used the correct term parity, we would find that money is depreciating. In 1934, anyone could buy a loaf of bread for 5 copper discs, or very small in diameter, about that size. They were called cents, 5 copper cents. Today, in 1978, you can still buy a pound of bread for 5 copper discs about that size of a cent. Only this time they're called dimes. So if we look at the parity of copper to bread, we would find that it has remained fairly stable from 1934 to 1978.
You mean the quantity of copper in the coin is about the same? Is that what you're saying?
The comparative value of copper to bread has remained stable. In fact, gold, which was chosen by the people in ancient times as a medium of exchange, was chosen for the fact that it did remain stable in relation to all other commodities over long periods of time. Now, if we look at an ounce of gold in 1934, it would have bought 300 loaves of bread. An ounce of gold today will still buy 300 loaves of bread.
So what do you suggest people should do?
Well, if we were using the gold and the silver as we had been, then our prices would not have changed.
If we stayed on a gold standard or a silver standard.
Our prices would have remained the same.
What should we do now, though?
Well, now the thing to do is to realize that as the paper, which is being accepted by the people as money, is a nice way to say it, the paper is printed 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It is accepted by the people as being the money. They're not using anything real. They're accepting this paper. Well, the people who print it pay for the paper and pay for the ink and pay for all of the labor that it takes to produce it, and everything they want to buy, they buy with that paper. It costs them absolutely nothing. The copper nickel coinage, they pay for the metal and pay for the labor and pay for the presses, and it costs them nothing. So if we are going to work for what we get, and they are going to get it for nothing. They are going to outbid us every time in the marketplace.
So there's no hope, is what you're saying.
There is no hope. So the only thing that we can do today is to get rid of the paper, and I believe you suggested that, before such time as this system has to change. If you were to take the piece of paper today and go to the bank and try to redeem with it, what you will get is one of these copper nickel coins, which is 3% of redemption, 2 half-dollars, 4 quarters, quote, or 10 dimes. Now, if you do that, you're getting 3% of wealth. If you were to change that piece of paper for 20 nickels, the metal in the 20 nickels might approach closer to 20 cents or 20% redemption. If you were to take the paper and get 100 copper cents, 100 copper cents is 2/3 of a pound of copper, and copper is selling at about 65 cents a pound, so you're getting about 40% redemption. Now, the reason people are buying the old silver coins is a very simple piece of arithmetic. If you buy these today, our old 90% silver coins, you would pay close to 4,000 Federal Reserve notes to get them, 3,900 yesterday, during the week. The 3,900 Federal Reserve notes that you would pay for $1,000 face value of this silver coin sounds like you're paying 4-to-1 premium. But there's 720 ounces of silver in $1,000 face value of these coins. And silver is selling at $5.30 an ounce. What is 530 times 720? And you come out with almost 100% redemption, still possible today, by those people knowledgeable enough to get out of the paper and go into the old silver coins.
Okay, but you go out of the paper and you go into the silver coins, and what's going to happen to the economy? What's going to happen to the average citizen?
Well, we would be forced to go back to reality. For this reason, I have written a solution to the problem, and I'm trying to interest senators and congressmen in the solution, which does offer us a way out. And the simple thing is to put the Federal Reserve through a bankruptcy proceedings. Make them take back every piece of paper and every number they've created and give us the title to wealth that they still have remaining. At the same time, we allow the banks to accept gold and silver coin from the people as a deposit and issue good receipts on them, like we had before, the gold certificates and silver certificates. Then, when every bit of the paper and the numbers had been redeemed by the banking system, the commercial banking system, which creates the money, then we will abolish the Legal Tender Act. This was done before to clean up the continental dollar trouble that we had earlier in colonial times.
Well, when you need to expand your money system, you have more people, and then, you know, there needs to be more tender for them to use and so on.
Well, this was discussed very ably by myself and Mr. Anatol Ballbach, who was Senior Vice President of the Fed, on a program where we spoke of free coinage. You see, when they don't have enough gold to coin into money, the mint simply allows anyone that wishes to bring silver and gold to the mint, and they fashion it into coins at no charge. That was the system we had before the gold standard. And when this country was really progressing and the people of the world felt that our streets were paved with gold, we had free coinage. We allowed the people to bring bullion to the mint. It was minted into coinage, and the coinage was used.
We have just about a minute left. Mr. Kornowski, what would you say?
There was a lot I would say. One is I would not advocate that the best solution, least cost solution, would be to go through a fundamental currency reform and back to a gold standard. The problem, as I see it, is that the government, in financing its expenditures, has one option open to them, and that is the printing of these pieces of paper, which have been accepted in the economy because they have been accepted in trade. Whether or not they have commodity value or not, they do serve a sound economic function. That is, they allow us to conduct our business back and forth, day to day, at least cost.
I'm going to have to interrupt you there. I'm sorry, we've really not finished our discussion, but thank you very much for joining us. Kathy, thank you. We'll see you next week.
This program was recorded.
Jenkins, by his own admission, the only monetary realist in the country. Just a few weeks ago, he appeared on the Eye on St. Louis program, and that appearance brought a great deal of reaction about money.
Well, Ron, I thought we'd discuss again that just like in colonial times, we're right back where we were then with a collapsing dollar.
And we'll find out about that collapsing dollar and what Mr. Jenkins thinks we can do about it right after this. I want to read something to you. It is from a book called Modern Money Mechanics, a workbook on deposits, currency, and bank reserves. It's printed by the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago, one of the governmental type authorities in the field of money. Money is such a routine part of everyday living that its existence and acceptance are ordinarily taken for granted. A user may sense that money must come into being either automatically as a result of economic activity or as an outgrowth of some governmental operation. But just how this happens is all too often a mystery. Now, couple that with this statement from the front page of the Wall Street Journal on September 24th, 1971. A pre-IMF seminar of eminent economists could not agree on what money is or how banks create it. Starting to get a little worried. John Maynard Keynes said, "There is no subtler, no surer means of overturning the existing basis of society than to debauch the currency. The process engages all the hidden forces of economic law on the side of destruction, and does it in a manner which no man in a million in which not one man in a million is able to diagnose." And an old Chinese proverb will end this little soliloquy: if you collect the money, you disperse the people. If you disperse the money, you collect the people. Now, we've done a great deal of talking about money. What is money? Can anybody agree on it? Can you agree on it? What is money, Mr. Jenkins?
Well, money is an abstract term that is generally accepted by the people to mean whatever is used as the medium of exchange. Now, we accept today that pieces of paper are the money. The Federal Reserve notes that we use now. But the pieces of paper are not the money in themselves. Now, what we had was silver coin, which the people deposited in the bank and were given the pieces of paper which represented the silver coin.
The silver then backed up, provided a base.
No, the word backed was used to hide the fact that the silver coin became non-redeemable with the certificate. Now, when the certificate acted by proxy in the marketplace, in transactions, it was not the paper itself that people were exchanging.
Right.
It was the coin that the paper could redeem from the bank. Now, when the paper could redeem silver coin, we had the value of silver represented by the paper, and our purchasing power was at a certain level. Now, today, what has happened is the silver has been removed, and it has been replaced by copper-nickel coinage. Now, this copper-nickel coinage represents only 3% of the parity that used to be represented by the silver coin.
This piece here.
That is correct. And you can certainly exchange silver for a great deal more of goods than you can copper. And if you think about it, this explains why we have such high prices today.
Okay, I'm not sure we can make that jump to that. You want to explain that a little further to me?
Well, surely. When the paper represented silver, it traded at the value of the silver it represented.
Okay.
Now it's trading, and it can only reclaim copper. So it trades at the value of the copper.
Which is less than the value of the silver.
Oh, yes. This is only 3% of the commodity value of the silver that we were using.
Now, when we were on the silver, using the silver to redeem these, what were we using? You mentioned 3% now. What was the redemption value then?
The silver was trading at a minimum of 90%.
Okay.
At a minimum of 90%, there was an accepted